Created mechanisms that allow the promotion of false speech without repercussion. I'm not saying that people shouldn't have the ability to lie online. Sure, free speech, you should absolutely be allowed to post whatever manner of content you want on any platform of your choice. But what you should not have is free reach. That has to have some consequences. Free speech, not free reach.
That's a slogan right there. Woo, welcome. You have now entered Mad Warfare, mutually assured distraction, where we explore the weird, terrifying, and sometimes hilarious ways war is fought today, and how we can all protect our minds before we go too mad to find them.
Oh my!
Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern.
Okay, you talk if you haven't got a brain.
Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern.
By now, I think all of us know that the algorithm is messing with us, correct? Yeah, I'd say we all know this is true. So how about we mess with it back? And who better to help us figure out how to do that than somebody who has been deep inside the machine. He's a machine learning scientist who's worked at Twitter, Adobe, Slack, CERN, MIT, and the founder of Simple, a tech nonprofit that's helping to rebuild digital trust across 7 countries. Count them, 7. Please welcome everyone, Dr. Swapneel Mehta.
Swapneel's here. Good to be here. Thank you guys for the invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. After I just read that list of names, my first question is, what scares you the most about what all these giant companies are doing or know about us?
So I think it's a misconception where, yes, you absolutely do have giant companies who want to know everything about you, but there are smaller players in the market that you should be far more worried about, because the fact is the giant companies have a PR problem to solve if they are discovered to be doing some egregiously bad stuff, but smaller companies don't have that problem. They disappear, reappear, and we've seen that happen with the case of companies like Cambridge Analytica, where it wasn't like a massive player in the space, but they did some harm, both reputationally, I would argue less so than it was made out to be from a technical standpoint. The real worry that people have, which is the real worry that people should have, which is who are the people that we don't know about that aren't in the news that are doing these kinds of things, gathering our data and trying to manipulate public narratives, try to manipulate public opinion, try to make things appear as they aren't, and push out narratives that aren't really true.
So watch for the piranhas, not the sharks.
Yep.
Wait a minute. No, that was a
really
good one. That was off the dome.
And Cambridge Analytica was small, right? That's what you're saying. So they were a small kind of, nobody really knew them until we all knew.
People in the places that they contracted to clearly did know them, and they did make a name for themselves in the space, but not for the general public until the scandal broke that hey, potential misuse of data from larger companies in an effort to manipulate public opinion through widespread campaigns.
Is there a limit to manipulation? And by that, I mean, for example, if we want our citizens to eat healthy, we might, quote unquote, manipulate them into buying more vegetables or something like that. Is that manipulation, or is there a line where it becomes, dark?
That's the golden question. So that's part of the reason, and this goes back to old science. I say old science. I'm also not the expert on this, but there is a whole story of why institutional review boards were instituted in the first place. Because people were doing, for those who haven't heard of IRBs are basically, let's say, guardrails. Like you've heard of guardrails for AI models. Imagine guardrails for all kinds of experimentation that happens at universities. You have to pass your experimental design through a panel of experts who will review different aspects of it and then allow you to conduct that experiment. This happened because, and I'm abstracting away details here just to keep it a little cleaner for people who don't want to hear about traumatizing things. But there were experiments conducted on people without letting them know that they were not really getting treatments for drugs, treatments for a disease that they were suffering. and these people were specifically targeted in some ways. Basically, it was not an above board kind of experiment, but it was conducted anyway because there was no one to review that this is not the way you should give treatment to people. Like companies conduct cancer medicine trials, and there are groups that receive placebo medication, but that is conducted in an ethical and pre-registered kind of way, so that you're not doing this like, hey, we're just not going to give drugs to people who show some kind of measure of other diseases because we don't want to take the risk of our drug looking bad. That kind of stuff, right? So the point is, a lot of people have instituted processes in place for the ethical and pre-registered deployment of experiments whenever it comes to any kind of trials. And the fact is, there are a lot of players who are not bound by those obligations in industry at all. That's just mostly academic, or mostly when you want to get like FDA approval for a drug, like processes for governments, right? But in a lot of places in industry, no one really looks over your shoulder. So you don't have to worry about the considerations that everyone else in their right mind would have to worry about.
It's interesting though to think about. So we're talking about the guardrails, right? So it seems like, to your point, Swapneel, so we have FDA, so we're looking at how we're regulating substances that we consume, but we don't seem to have the equivalent for the narratives and information that we consume. Is that right?
Exactly. And the problem there is we've designed platforms in a way where we have incentivized their creation for the promotion of all manner of information. Like, we have free speech protection for platforms to be allowed to promote all manner of content without being responsible for the content itself, which is in Section 230 of the Constitution. This is a two-sided double-edged sword, is because that also means that then you can't hold them responsible when there is bad content that is promoted by algorithms as directly, because the same condition applies, which is they're not responsible for the content they're spreading. And by and large, most of the major platforms have invested significantly in trust and safety, in platform abuse prevention, in spam detection, in coordinated activity detection, threat actors, advanced like cybersecurity, all manner of harm. But that significant term that I use, invested significantly, varies, because there is no to say what is the right level of investment that you should put into these efforts and protect your online users. Like, in theory, as much money as you can put in would be great, but platforms are then obligated to business interests, and then you can't really invest more than a certain amount, and that is entirely up to you to decide. So we saw the tech layoffs that in large part affected trust and safety teams, because they're like, hey, these are teams that are impeding the progress or unfettered progress of other teams by raising questions like, okay, so what if someone uses this new feature in a bad way? Like that's bad for the feature, because now someone has raised this question and we have to spend time answering this question. So in a lot of, and this is anecdotal evidence, right? I'm not claiming any particular platform here, but like friends in the space had to deal with this issue. How do you tell your manager that you should be up for promotion because you delayed the flow of these 3 features, whereas that's what they perceive it as, whereas what you actually did was prevented harms that could have reached millions of people. But you can't prove a negative. Like you can't prove that this harm was prevented unless you put into place those monitoring techniques. So the absence of harm is not a good way to assess the impact of a team. In fact, that's part of the problem where, it was really hard to measure what kinds of positives were coming out of trust and safety, because platforms did not find an easy way to measure the absence of harm. And now that's where regulation would really help, because it provides the complement, which is these are the compliance measures that you need to stick to. And that is measurable. Like, okay, we've complied with A, B, C, D, E, F, G kind of regulations when it comes to building new kinds of algorithms, so that we are ensuring these algorithms don't create those kinds of harms, or we are transparently reporting that over time, these are the harms that have not materialized to the levels that they were before. Those are not treated as publishers. And so they're not responsible for the content that they host. Now, this notably does not extend to illegal content, of course. Like you do hold platforms responsible for terrorism material and things that are put out there that may directly be in violation of the law. But this does not extend to like everyday posts like Sean and I would make about, say, a meme or something like some kind of maybe parody of some public incident that happened. Like those things are protected under Section 230 as we are the ones responsible for it and not the platforms.
So it sounds like social media rulers are not responsible for what they host in their space, but they have free reign to decide what gets amplified and turn up the mic, if you will, and say we actually like it when more people go over here because they click more and they spend more money, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm thinking about how we relate this to physical life, right? So if I'm hosting something at my house or at an office I have, and somebody comes in and falls down the stairs, they can sue me, right? So there's like this interesting, why aren't they held to the same standard if somebody gets injured?
When you talked about the social media platforms decide, I don't know how much these folks even understand those algorithms that they're putting out there as well. So not as easy as like, oh, we understand every little bit of this.
I think there are 3 points raised. So first was Jocelyn's point about like, what motivates this? Like, why would we do this, or why would we allow this for platforms to not be responsible for the information they produce? And then, Sean, you raised 2 points, which were one, we don't really understand content distribution algorithms, which we'll get to in a second. And then the second point, which is these algorithms themselves are the ones that are promoting content across the platforms and not just like platforms as an entity. So it's really the algorithm that's doing this business of content distribution. So first, to Jocelyn's point, I think the intention, as with much of the regulation that was written, I want to say when politicians were really good people, and I do believe that there was a point when politicians, someone had to have been good people, like there had to have been good politicians. And I still like, I mean, I don't know. I want to believe in the good side of people. So maybe call me naive, but the intention behind the regulation was free knowledge and expression. In print, you had a certain time delay for knowledge to get to people. You had gatekeepers that would decide what would go in and what would not. You had money that you had to pay to access information. But with the internet, everything changed. Suddenly, you could just click a button on a device that you owned anyway, access the internet, and get a lot of information for free. Like Wikipedia was built out of the niceness of people contributing to these articles out of the good of their heart, or like activism or just passion for creating knowledge repositories that anyone could access for free. And it was incredible to have that information because most of my childhood projects were based basically on Wikipedia, me reading those pages, understanding about something and like building stuff out. I would not have been here today if it were not for Wikipedia in many ways, right? And I think most of us can say that for people who have used Wikipedia. So that's point number one. Like the intention was free expression. And not holding people liable, because frivolous lawsuits, I from India, but when I came to the US, I realized frivolous lawsuits were a real thing. Like I didn't realize this as deeply or as directly. It's not to say we don't have those in India. Of course, we have a lot of those in India. It just doesn't affect the everyday person as much as the example you raised of someone falling in your house and actually suing you for it. Like that's very like out of the ordinary where I come from. But anyway, the point that I'm trying to raise was to offer that liability protection to platforms in service of the promotion of free expression. I think that regulation made sense. What has happened since has been the utilization of this law to grow out multi-billion-dollar businesses without trying to invest the same measure in the protection of free speech and expression. And the third thing that's happened since is we've created mechanisms that allow the promotion of false speech without repercussion. I'm not saying that people shouldn't have the ability to lie online. Sure, free speech, you should absolutely be allowed to post whatever manner of content you want on any platform of your choice. But what you should not have is free reach. that has to have some consequences. Free speech, not free reach.
Reach.
That's a slogan right there.
In a longer discussion of those, but my point to Sean was, yes, algorithms are really complex. But the thing is, platforms have also designed their own internal experimentation platforms. So, for example, when someone
Right.
changes the algorithm at a company like Meta, they have their internal experiments to show, hey, like we can A/B test this to see if there is a positive change, negative change in depending on the metric that we define for those positive and negative changes. And we know that now publicly because all of these whistleblower documents that have been published have actually laid out some of the experiments that they've conducted internally, the results that they have seen. And the reason there were so many claims of like, hey, they're not promoting good things, they're promoting bad things, was because they were kind of aware that some of these experiments didn't lead to optimal outcomes. Like people engage more with angry content, and they didn't really
Agree.
engage as much with happy content, for example. So if anger is the prime emotion that your algorithms are promoting, someone should step in and probably say like, this is not a good thing. But at the same time, if you have metrics set up to actually like reward people for building better engagement, period, without looking at what is being engaged with, then people are not going to be incentivized to say, hey, that might not be a great idea. And on the other hand, I know many people who have stood up and said these things at the same companies, right? Like, it's really nice for everyone to, pile on top of Meta and say they're doing bad things. But like, you forget that there are so many other companies out there in the same ballpark, competing with the same kinds of products, who also have not been put in the limelight because no whistleblowers exist and all of these internal documents are still internal. So it's like, one, I am naive. I believe in the goodness of people, and I know of these people who worked at these companies who personally supported me at tremendous cost to themselves. Like, that matters to me, number one. Number two, I think that yes, company leadership determines a lot of this, and you should always hold leadership accountable. There is no reason to give people who are making billions of dollars every year a free pass. Right. But the third, very few people actually understand how to propose solutions. Like, there are so many people who can just point fingers, and finger pointing is important. Identifying the problem is super important, and I would argue the first step of the process. But there are the rest of the steps that we need to take. Like, viable solutions are something that we need to do a better job at, and it places the onus on us as the people who are not at the company to give those bits of research to the people at the company who can advocate for it, and those bits of regulation to the company or to the managers of the company who need to guide their team and say, hey, that's the compliance is the reason we need to do this. I'm not saying this, other people are, and the company is going to be held liable if we don't. So that is a direction I tend to lean towards, like provide solutions and hope that the right people get a chance to fight for it.
That's why we have you. Because
Yeah. Speaking of
the fun
solutions,
Yeah.
I think I don't remember, there's a behavioral scientist who talks about like a S intervention and I intervention, I think it is. It's basically system or systemic, right? And then individual. So for example, we want to reduce the smoking. And it's like, well, are you going to put it all on the individual? Doesn't seem really fair. Or, is it all systemic? Sometimes these things need to work together. In Canada, for example, they put pictures of horrifying, here's your lungs after a day of smoking, and they're dead. And they're trying to dissuade the individual from purchasing, but there's not really that system incentive. You can still buy it. It's still fairly available. While other minds, including yours, figure out how we get that like S level, bigger level, system level guardrails in place. What are the I level individual things that we can do? How can we, Swapneel, hack the algorithm?
I love that question. I will try to answer that question, like you said, at the eye level, which is through the use of individual platforms. Okay, so let's do a 3-minute breakdown of how an algorithm works in general, very broadly, and try to understand then how to reverse engineer it. One, algorithms tend to take in signals. So if you're saying algorithms are the ones spreading content, right, promoting content, recommending content to people, then they do this on the basis of certain attributes that they identify from you. For example, your IP address. You're accessing the internet through a device. That device is connected to the Wi-Fi associated with an IP address. That IP address has certain connotations. It tells you about the location. When you know about a location, you know about general preferences for people in that area. So, for example, even if you open up Google search, it will tell you, do you want to personalize the results to your location or not? Because when I search for donut shops in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I'm probably not looking for donut shops in Hanoi, Vietnam. But I haven't told Google that. I've just told Google donut shops. And so Google has to infer somehow that these are the relevant results. And the reason we really like these platforms is because they do that for us. So personalization, again, is good because they tell us things that we don't necessarily input into the platforms. An even better example of this is when it comes to personalizing your queries in your chat GPT and your perplexity to the past responses, to the past questions you've asked. So for example, now when I ask ChatGPT a question, try to help me find some research in this area of marketing. Right? It infers from the past conversation I've had that, okay, this is the postdoc, this is person working on behavioral research. So when they ask about marketing, they want XYZ papers. But I don't want to go ahead and tell them that each time. I'm too tired to type all this or save it and copy paste it. So personalization started out really good. The problems that arose were when algorithms started micro-targeting based on these personal attributes. And then they added ads on top of that. That became a little bit of a problem because now it's not about personalizing the query to you, but also personalizing content that platforms are making money off of to the people who receive that content. Again, by and large, they're making money because we click on the content. For better or worse, we do follow through on the suggestions that are made to us. But the bigger part of that problem then is, how does this content influence us? Like, are they pushing content to us that is making us think in a certain way? And a big part of this was the Brexit campaign, right? The claim there was, okay, you influenced people to actually leave the EU, whereas by and large, the repercussions have been really bad for the people who voted for it. So if you had told them that ahead of time or conveyed that information in an unbiased manner, would they have still chosen to leave the EU? Similar examples in a lot of other countries, particularly in the last year because elections. So algorithms were used to promote content, for example, that just made people believe politicians were less extreme than they actually were, or would take different steps than they actually did. And this is across a number of different countries in the world, right? Like dictators were perceived as furry, cute animals because they made deepfakes of the dictators and connected with the public. So the newer generation who didn't have an idea of the history of the politics that what our leaders have pursued, all they had was these algorithms are saying this is a cute person. They're friendly. They're interacting with me. Naturally, this is like, okay, this is worth a shot. Why not? And so algorithms are basically being weaponized to manipulate people in different kinds of ways. A lot of these manipulations are non-malicious. Like we've used algorithms to get people to vote. Not vote any certain way, but just go out and vote. Like we run ad campaigns, and I say we as like the American people, like there are people in America who have run ad campaigns for politicians just to get the vote out more broadly. Activism is a big part of why algorithms are useful. The Arab Springs revolt, like hashtags were used a lot to get people to connect over a common cause. The idea of personalizing content to people then was, you've used this hashtag in the past, you've participated in this movement in the past, here is some content that you might find relevant that makes you more informed. And that was the starting point. But now that it has warped into this beast where everything you do online is treated as a signal to try to personalize and micro-target some form of product, advertisement, behavior, cohort-based outcome to you. And that's become a problem because when everything you see is hyper-personalized to you, you suddenly stop exploring and it starts exploiting you. Like, okay, Swapneel likes art, music, and dance. Those are the only three things we're going to put on Swapneel's feed. And suddenly he doesn't even realize that he might like football. or he might like hiking, or he might like travel. So most algorithms still try to strike a balance between this exploration and exploitation trade-off. But because of all the signals that they have used to hyper personalize things to us, we enter these things called filter bubbles and echo chambers, where we only hear voices that we like. No voices that are discordant with our ideologies. No voices that is telling you, no, something might, some way you think about the world might be wrong. Someone else might have a better way of thinking about the world that you could learn from. And you don't necessarily have to agree with it. So these agreement bubbles is basically the problem that algorithms have entered us into, whether that's like you self-selecting into a bubble, whether that's the algorithm recommending all of these things to take you into a bubble, or whether it's like these implicit signals that you give out, like scrolling through a post versus staying on another post. Both of those are different signals that you give out. Scrolling past a post versus staying on a post. Both of those are different signals you give out. So let's talk for a second about signals and how we can use signals to reverse engineer algorithms.
You're talking about getting information in an unbiased way. Is that possible for us to get unbiased information?
That's an excellent question. I think it is possible depending on your definition of unbiased. So, for instance, one approach to unbiasedness is try to identify the lean of different kinds of content and sample across this lean. When I say lean, I mean Fox News has a right-leaning bias. CNN may have a left-leaning bias. There are other news outlets that are based on the spectrum of right to left in the US and elsewhere in the world, different kinds of right to left spectrums, respectively. If you sample posts from across the spectrum and place them on a feed in one way, that is unbiased. On the other hand, this is just news content, right? So how do you extrapolate this unbiasedness across the diversity of content on social media? There you go into some directions which involve different kinds of topics, diversity across topics, diversity within topics, and then stances that people express to try to hide a broader array of stances reflected in the post.
The perspective.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I agree with you in the question that is there a general way to have unbiased content? And it's very hard to have a perfectly random sample. But in our case, what we really care about is if I have a friends and family network, right? I want a balance between the content that I get from that network and the content that's elsewhere, like ads or brands or platforms or anyone else is trying to push to me.
It would be amazing if you could filter all this social media input you get, the way that you can, like there's those places you can see which way the news leans.
Mm-hmm.
If you could do that across your feed somehow.
Oh, there are ways to do that. So there are softwares that people have built. I remember the ones that they built for Twitter, and those are now sadly defunct because of the API shutting off or becoming too expensive.
Yeah.
But there are people who have built things like, have I shared fake news? That was one of the really cool things that I saw them build. There is a guy called Stephen Ranthiedt who built this, and I really enjoyed the fact that he looked at what I have shared in the past. So I don't even know if I have shared like this with the intention of sharing it because it had a particular bias, but he looked at the news links and tried to identify, is there a particular lean that you have had implicitly in the past posts that you have shared? And again, it was a brittle methodology in the sense where it manually involved, like, I can filter things if it falls within this subset of URLs. But that subset of URLs, like domains, newsrooms, was broad enough to have like a couple of thousand different newsrooms. So there are two things to point out. One, agentic models like LLMs generally are better weak labelers than even humans might be for specific use cases. So they can label things better than humans can. When you ask it to label.
Like categorize?
Yeah, exactly. Categorize certain kinds of posts.
Yeah.
Right? And that is like very cool because now we can do labeling for really cheap. And labeling is a real problem for many use cases where you need human raters to try and rate content and put it into different categories based on a preset set of criteria. For example, I have 10 pieces of content. I want to know which ones are cats, which ones are dogs, which ones are horses, which ones are elephants. And that helps me because
Not a
then
hot
I
dog.
can, yeah, I can show you whatever category you tend to like the most. The most.
It makes me think of wow, if we could gamify this. Like, for example, I want to get the rainbow of color in my diet. Like, I want to have different color vegetables and all that's supposed to be really good for you, right? If we could do that with our content somehow, to say, and I don't know if that's a bad idea, but just to have a spectrum where you're getting multiple rays of light, as it were.
Let's get into those. So starting with you talked about bots. So let me show you the simplest.
By the way, if you want to share your
Yeah.
screen, you just listen to the beautiful audio of my voice and our voice for whatever reason. You may want to check in on video of this one because RGF Swapneel show us a little something something.
Oh, a little interruption to say this episode is made possible by Randori Resources. If you'd like to train your mind the way athletes train their bodies, check out Randori Resources, randori-resources.com.
Okay, so let me share my screen and
Gotcha.
okay, let's start with RT.com. RT, I picked this one because there is the US for a while. Now I guess not, but for a while they were talking about Russian interference in the elections a lot, to the extent where they had a special kind of investigator look into and write a 400-page report, I think it was, around Russian interference in the elections. And one part of Russia's pillars of disinformation is state-backed media. So the claim is that Russia uses state media to try to disguise and promote narratives that are essentially very biased, of course, in the favor of the state, and put them out there so that people tend to get misinformed around what the reality might be and try to think about, like, okay, if we need a war, for example, Russian invasion of Ukraine is necessary and justified to protect sovereign interests. Similar to a lot of narratives they have put out before. But this is the claim, right? So the US says Russia bad. Russia is like, yeah, but US not good either. So you're not really anyone to say we are bad. So there is a back and forth that keeps happening, which is basically morals based or values based judgment, which is not perfect, in the sense where there is always some kind of bias that enters the picture. What we did was, instead of looking at what are these, and the websites for these state media providers look basically like very similar to any kind of other provider, like the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. Like, there is no material difference in these layouts of, hey, there is a bunch of news on a page and this news is divided into sections and countries and so on. So the point is, when you look at the promotion efforts of these kinds of news narratives on social platforms, that's when you start to realize, okay, there might be something here. So what we said was, for 1 second, pause and don't look at the US saying Russia is bad or Russia saying the US is bad or whatever. Let's just look at these state-backed media providers. So what are they putting out? Not so much what are they putting out, but rather how are they putting it out on social media platforms. So I picked this is one of the stories from yesterday or something today. I just picked a story. The simplest way to actually look at how a story is promoted is look at the URL and see who's promoting it on the platform. Right? And when you put that URL in on the platform, this is Twitter. I'm just looking through who is spreading what on the platform. I see a bunch of accounts that have posted the story. May 23rd it is. And the story, then I did the same thing, looking across 1,000 different stories between 2021 and 2022. This was the time of the Ukraine war, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And then I looked at those stories from the standpoint of identifying what it has taken to promote those on social media. And we found some very interesting things. So these are the narratives that I was telling you about. This was how we found those narratives. And now I wrote a report about each of these narratives. For example, I guess let's look at this one, 9 Jan 2022, the URL. We looked at a lot of things around the article itself, like what is the language of the article, what are the key words that are used and reused in the article quite a bit. And most importantly, we tried to design a system that would tell you who has promoted this article through online networks. Now, social platforms are built of people following each other or people engaging with each other's content. So broadly, the reason we call them social networks are because they are actual networks of people connected with each other. We looked at, among other things, is to find these are the accounts that are promoting this post on social platforms. And the reason we say they're connected with each other is some of them follow each other. But here, this set of accounts goes into this kind of dashboard. And the reason I am telling you this is really interesting is because these accounts that have promoted this particular narrative, again, different narrative, different time period, same process. They've shared the same narrative about 37 times in this group, about 26 times in this group, about 23 times in this group.
Oh, okay. So for those just listening, I want to back up for just 1 second. So we're looking at the headlines on RT.com, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what Swapneel's saying is he sees a headline about, that one I think is about Nazis. And he goes to Twitter and he copies and pastes the URL into Twitter to see who's been sharing that particular story. And now we're looking at Simple, which you created, right?
Yeah, so this is Parrot, which was created with the Sunday Times and a German media firm.
Okay, so parrot.simple, SIMPPL.org. So he's going to this dashboard, which is what we're looking at now. And there's one user at the top, Florazens, who shared 37 times in 2.6 seconds. Do I have that right?
Yep.
Looking at this? Yeah. Okay.
So shared 37 times on average within 2.6 seconds of the first person sharing that article. So that's the idea, right? Mm-hmm. Every time Sean posts an article, I post it within 2.5 seconds of Sean posting it.
You're ready.
Wow.
I'm just always ready. And 37 times is too much.
Always ready.
To be coincidence. So we're basically making sure beyond a reasonable doubt that these kinds of behaviors are really improbable to be authentic. And then note that I've not made any moral judgments here. I'm not talking about what they're promoting. This is not about like, hey, this article points out someone is a Nazi or not. Like, I'm just saying these accounts have shared the same thing really, really quickly. Within 2 seconds of the first account sharing it, the second shares it. Then that happens separately on 37 different occasions. So it's really weird that every time they're just ready to share. And when there was a tool called Botometer built by a friend of mine online, we could show that, hey, Botometer detects some of these accounts, but not all of them. So again, I'm staying away from making a value judgment and just saying, look at the data, because the data nobody can debate with. The data are out there for us all to see. There is no one who doesn't have access to this, because you can just look up these accounts on Twitter and try to look at what they have shared. Now, I've anonymized some of these accounts, so you might not find the exact account username, because that is a violation of Twitter's policies. But either way, my point is, these exist. There is real data behind it. Feel free to reach out and we can show you what that data is. And Twitter actually listened, right? Like, there are people at Twitter who took notice of this and started to work with us to investigate these accounts. And we realized from there that, hey, like, if this is the case for Twitter, right? Like I said before, we're not making value judgments. We're not making any specific claims for one platform. We did the same thing on an analysis of Meta. And we looked at public groups and pages that were trying to promote campaigns that constituted political harassment for a lot of minority politicians. And there was an aspect where we had to identify who those politicians are, what were the campaigns, what was going on, how do you identify these using both keyword and non-keyword based approaches, where there are, certain posts that abuse a politician, that just call them out for being like random personal attacks on themselves and their family. But we discovered that there were these groups of 600 pages and public groups and pages that were promoting these networked harassment campaigns. And we could do that external to Meta and provide that as a set of reports to Meta that help them in deploying their content moderation practices. And in fact, while the Twitter thing we did not lead to a takedown because Twitter got acquired and then dismantled before that, the Meta thing that we did lead to material action, because in Q1 2024, they released an adversarial threats report saying, hey, we took down a bunch of Bangladeshi network of accounts. And of these kinds of campaigns is Because you don't usually see just the perpetrators in the network. Like earlier, I showed you like let's describe it for the audience, right? Like a graph of say 10 or 15 different accounts that share this and that are in a network. But in reality, these 10 or 15 accounts are embedded in real networks of 500 to 1,000 accounts. So it's really hard even for platforms themselves to just identify which accounts are doing this at scale across millions of different posts that are being uploaded every minute. And that scale is the real problem because nothing works at the same accuracy when you try to scale it up naively. Even if you miss out, if you're 99.9% accurate for a sample of 100 posts, you have less than one post of error. But if you're 99.9% accurate for a sample of 10 million posts, there are still 1,000 to 10,000 posts that you might miss out on. It is what platforms want to work towards. But I told you about how the algorithms are leveraged. If I can, I'll pause for a question if you have any.
Can anyone use that? Can any person go into that parrot that you used and do this for ourselves?
So that's exactly what we're designing now. With Parrot, it was a prototype that we built for Twitter. We expanded that to Meta, we expanded that to Telegram, we expanded that to Study Truth Social as well. And now we're building a cross-platform system where you don't just get to see the narratives, but you also get to see the topic embeddings. You get to query it with an AI chatbot that allows you to evaluate what are the narratives purely grounded in the data that you're provided and not connected to the internet otherwise. So the idea behind agentic AI was, what if we create this platform where everyone can access information with context? The practice of an AI chatbot is, what if we took a technology that we can't really explain the inner workings of and connected it to bad things on the internet in addition to good things on the internet and just hope that this shit works?
That's AI chat in a nutshell.
I paraphrase from the words of the amazing James Mickens, who is a professor at Harvard. Every single keynote of his should be created into an NFT and sold just in honor of his memory.
Wow.
I'm sure he would appreciate people grifting NFTs out of his keynotes. But amazing speaker. His point, entirely valid, is that we don't really have the inner workings of AI down to a science yet. We are trying out different empirical experimental techniques to explain AI. But this isn't an exact science because you cannot tie your predictions back to the original data set yet. So you don't know what causes harm and what doesn't. And we have seen egregious harms here in the sense of child pornography in large scale image data that has been used to train thousands of models that are already out there.
Oh, God.
And once those models are out there, you cannot control for limiting the use cases, because once someone downloads the weights, that's it. Like, it's like piracy, right? Like in piracy, you might even be able to detect the content based on visual detectors that say, hey, I know this movie scene because I know the actors in it and I can redetect anyone else uploading that elsewhere. With model weights, they're just numbers. You cannot just detect numbers because numbers can be trivially changeable or like disguised. So there are lots of real challenges with AI, but let's talk about the algorithms in particular. So I told you bots and networks of attackers, even nation states, are using these techniques to manipulate the algorithms and promote some kinds of content. But let's get back to the I, right? You asked me about the I level interventions where I can drive changes to algorithms that I see online to make my internet experience better. And I want to start with one of the most popular platforms that anyone who has ever looked for a job online has probably created a profile on. Can you guess the platform that I'm talking about?
Yes,
LinkedIn, everybody's favorite social network.
The new Twitter, because now all I see on my LinkedIn feeds are people making Twitter style posts about,
They're hot takes.
hot takes, but also clearly AI generated content. So
Yeah.
I got annoyed by that a while ago and I was like, how do I improve my LinkedIn experience? And my background's in recommender systems. So I tended to build these algorithms myself. In fact,
Yours.
I patented one of these algorithms for Adobe where we recommended trending hashtags for videos. So that is out there.
Very good.
The point that I realized was important to make here, and I made this earlier, was algorithms depend on signals. No matter what you do on an online platform, you are giving the platform some kind of signal. Either that's a negative signal, either that's a positive signal, either that's an implicit signal, or that is an explicit signal. Your interactions with content are not just limited to engagement. We tend to think of liking, sharing, and subscribing as the real ways that we are giving signals to platforms. But the fact is, even scrolling through posts gives you signals about different kinds of posts. And the reason some algorithms are so precise about giving us content we like is because they immediately respond to those signals. So there is a feedback loop where you give it a signal and it changes in response to the signal you provided. So with LinkedIn, if you open up your LinkedIn, you'll see three things. Is my LinkedIn visible?
Yes, we see it.
Huzzah.
Cool. So I'll go through some examples of posts and I'll try to see if we can point out signals for the audience here. So I see one post here from Jan, who is a first degree connection of mine. So I know Jan, I've met Jan. I really like Jan. I enjoy talking to him. So this is a post
Shout
from
out to
him.
Zion.
So this is Jan, this is Larel, he's a professor, another post on my LinkedIn feed. Here is a Y Combinator post, this is from a brand. And then you start getting into some kinds of ads. So this is a popular course on LinkedIn Learning. Then from brands, you get into suggested posts. So these are not first degree connections, for example, this is second degree connections. After suggested, you see this. This is Gauravi. Someone commented on this. So I was recommended this post on my feed because someone in my network commented on this post. And finally, we get to jobs that have been recommended for me because I've set up certain searches before. So different kinds of signals are used to recommend posts for me. At which point you should realize that, okay, so you can choose the signals you provide to the algorithms that start recommending things for you. For example, I don't know this person. I don't know Daniela. I don't know who she is or what she does specifically because I've not met them. I've just followed them. But I know that I followed them because they like tech VC posts. And so I am amortizing my effort by saying I will follow some of these people who are like community partners, who are like fundraising support, or who are like, leaders at different nonprofits, or people who end up posting about grants. And by following them, I am sending my algorithm a signal that like, okay, they followed like several people in this space. There is a certain interest that they might have in that space that results in further recommendations. So as you go deeper into this LinkedIn profile that I'm sharing with you, you'll start seeing that, okay, there are certain kinds of grants that are coming out. There are certain kinds of institutional posts that are coming out. Like I am looking for partnerships for Sim People to work with people on these things. So Sim People is a nonprofit. As of 2 weeks ago, we got approved for a 501c3 status as well. We've been working for the last 3 years. Thank you. That was a painful process of calling up the IRS until they said, yeah, we finally approved your status.
Good.
So it took a year, but we made it. And the areas that we work in are broadly technology development for products that relate to the improvement of digital trust. So how do you get people to trust the information they see, whether that's through AI-based search, whether that's through social listening, whether that is through literacy efforts that tie in with providing health information, providing elections-related information. Just broadly, we work in the space of improving access to online information as a lever to improve trust. So, and we're working with a number of different organizations. We're working with some folks at the UN. We're working with some folks at Deutsche Welle in Germany. We're working with some folks in Mongolia who are fact checkers. We're working in India with some newsrooms. Like I said, we're working in several countries. And now we have a couple of grants and things that we have been awarded over the last couple of years from Google, from Mozilla, from Wikimedia. Really, really, really encouraging communities of people who have all supported us throughout. And we're growing out fast. But that is all to say that I use my LinkedIn to advance all of our efforts through these 4 simple steps. One, find about 5 or 10 opportunities that relate to your career, right? Like you are actively involved in career building for. And I can take the example of grants, right? Like money is running out in the federal funding ecosystem for a lot of projects, and people are looking for grants quite a bit. I found someone who tends to post a lot about grants, who is a strategist for programs and partnerships and portfolios, like a very apt profile for the kinds of posts that they make.
How did you find that?
I found them because I was looking for journalism focused grants, and I saw that journalism focused grants, there is a person who has posted about them. Then I followed up on who is the person posting about them and their job profile, with the intention of thinking through, do they frequently post about this, or was this a one-off thing that they posted about? I realized I looked through 10, 15, 20 different people and found this person in particular who has not only a profile that like supports their posting of these things, but is also genuinely interested in sharing these things, because they're not doing this for any connect with me or consult with me kind of reasons. Them I followed, and then they started sharing other people's posts that I also followed. And those 2 signals, me giving LinkedIn those signals, in addition to me generally searching for grants, has now made my LinkedIn feed like a very easy place to find grants. Like if I scroll down 5 times, I'm pretty sure I'll see one or 2 grant opportunities that I can actually apply for right now. There we go. UNICEF, or no, Working Party on Regulatory Cooperation or whatever. I can probably join this, right? Like, and it's bonkers because now this addicts me to LinkedIn, because every time I wake up, I'm like, new work to do. Go scroll LinkedIn. But on the other hand, it's really nice because I have one place that I just have to go to do some work, and that's that. So two or 3 things that I will say here. One, I keep giving it a signal of saving posts. So I have saved a lot of LinkedIn posts that I intend to apply to, but even if I don't intend to apply to, I save it as a positive signal for the algorithm to learn what kinds of things to recommend to me. Second, I actively follow people on a regular basis that relate to my area of work, even if I don't connect with them. The reason I follow them is their posts then show up on my feed. So for example, AI research engineer recruitment, or some kind of case that I need to know about. Like my feed is not full of promotional posts, but actually full of posts that give me information to read about. And that's why I make social media useful for myself. And the last,
Also want to point out, for those of us who save things with the intention of reading it later, and you have like 2,700 things you've saved that you never look at again, there's still value in that as we're learning. Still, you're training the algorithm to show you more of the stuff you want. So keep doing it.
So I'll close out with that for LinkedIn, and then move on to a more interesting platform that people seem to care about a lot more directly. One which actually results in food in your stomach, called Uber Eats.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
So 2 things to note about algorithms. We've talked about signals. We've talked about implicit and explicit signals. But what we've also talked about is behavior. We've talked about this a little bit, not explicitly in the sense of algorithms, but this is beautiful. Okay. So I'll pause on this screen. You can see that there's already a promotion popping up on my screen, and I'll explain what is going on here, right? And this is at the cost of losing all of my future savings on Uber Eats, but I am doing it for the people, and I feel good about that, right?
Enjoy 15%
Let them know
off.
the gravity.
So the reason I keep getting promotions, so for the last 4 years, I was a graduate student. For the last 3 years, I did not cook, and I still survived with enough savings in my bank account to afford my wedding. The reason that happened, the primary reason, was I actually managed to get 40% off almost every week on Uber Eats for like a couple of years. And I didn't actively try to do that. It just happened. But then eventually someone asked me, like, why does this keep happening? And I was like, that's a good question. And so I explored the patterns in my behavior when using the system. And I realized that I was basically, without realizing this, gaming the algorithm to get myself more discounts. So what ended up happening was, on Uber Eats, the recommender system tends to recommend restaurants and offers and everything to you. Their goal is to get you to convert. And you convert, this is terminology that basically says you pay them money to order something from a restaurant. And that act gets them money, both from you and from the restaurant, because they do charge something on top. Now, the three things that algorithms seem to care about: one, of course, you add things to your cart. You are moving along the so okay. Here is the way you think about conversions in a very simple way. A user starts their journey on the homepage. Right? Like whenever you open UberEats.com, you typically tend to go to the homepage. And that homepage has multiple restaurants. In your journey, you're going to visit multiple different restaurants, pick a restaurant. Then in that restaurant, you're going to add multiple things to your cart, go to the cart, review the final details of the cart, proceed, select a tip, review the details of that tip, then proceed. Then it's going to say, does this look good to you? We're almost placing this order. And then you will say looks good, and it places the order. Or the timer expires, and by default, it places that order as long as it looks good to you. Right? So far, this is the workflow of modern day Uber Eats. Now, at every point in this flow, the further along in the flow you are, the more valuable you are to them, because you are closer to conversion. So the discounts or the recommender system in this case is optimizing for getting users further along in the flow, because the closer they are to conversion, the more the money you make for the platform. The way discounts would work, and this is me theorizing because I didn't work at Uber Eats. I just worked on recommender systems and she got a lot of discounts from the platform. So I'm inferring from that. The fact that I open multiple restaurants, add some items there that I like to my cart, I was doing it to save myself future time, because I was like, okay, the next 5 weeks, I'm going to order from these places and probably order this kind of stuff from those places. It would be nice if they already had discounts, but fair enough. I'll add them to my cart anyway. That resulted in them realizing my net value as a customer might be higher than the average net value. Or maybe I just gave it so many signals that conversion track that I was in seemed further along. And so they kept giving me discounts to get me to convert. And I mean, to their credit, like those discounts did work. Like I paid a lot less money. And so I kept converting, because if it's like $8 to $10 a meal in New York, that is phenomenally cheap for a grad student to get healthy food for the most part. So those kinds of things I then replicated, and I was like, okay, does this actually work? Like if I add multiple restaurants to my cart, if I add multiple food items to my cart and I don't order, but I go through this flow to the furthest point I can and then stop ordering, does this actually work to convert them? And it turns out if I 50-50, like 60-40, it will usually work. And you don't want to overdo it again, because you're not, your goal is not to exploit the system to the point where like you lose out on the discounts, but exploit it enough where like they win and you win a little more than them, because those discounts are really good. So that's the idea, because I also realize the discounts go down if you over exploit it. So
what other kind of efforts did you want to kind of like show and kind of talk more, been involved with, that maybe folks in our audience kind of be interested, or maybe even find ways to help?
Oh, we've been talking a lot about digital literacy, trying to get people to trust the information they see online. And one part of that is providing value to them. Like it's not just about information. People don't see information as value directly. But for example, health information in a specific context that advances your health outcomes, your offline health outcomes, that is material value that AI can provide. And we've seen enough examples of AI saying, hey, I was going to doctors enough times, did not detect a disease, but I asked AI and it helped me find that this could be a symptom of something possibly larger. And I ended up, discovering this for myself using AI. Inspired by those kinds of things, but very worried that was a one positive example with lots of harms of AI giving you medical information. We created a system with humans in the loop to verify AI-generated information that still scales up. And we deployed that as a platform in India to provide health information to women in rural parts of the country. And that is a pilot that we've launched not just in India. We've also done some early work in Bangladesh. We're working broadly on women's health issues and trying to address the maternal mortality rate by using AI to provide verified and reliable maternal health information in a way that is integrated within the system. So the one part of that is like, oh, we can build WhatsApp-based AI chatbots and reach everyone in the world. Okay, great. Yes, you can. But who verifies the information? What value is it providing? And how do you ensure that there is a feedback mechanism where you know what's going wrong when it's going wrong? Right? We did all three of those things. The chatbot took us 3 days to build. The rest of the system took us a year and a half to integrate within the context of India's frontline health workers in a different state, deploy locally, do the user research to ensure that your multilingual chatbot actually speaks colloquially. Multilingual is not the problem. The speaking colloquially is the problem, because if I say, hey, Sean, it has been a pleasure interacting with you over this virtual medium using computer mediated communication, that is not the same as saying, I loved it.
Indubitably. Exactly.
It's not the same as I love being on the podcast with you, Sean. Like that's different.
Yeah.
And I need to be able to have colloquial language for me to really establish a relationship with the information being provided as trustworthy. That's about it. The other thing I'm doing, so that's a spin out tech venture from the nonprofit we built out, because we realized even before grants went away, like the first thing I realized when I started a nonprofit was grants are not forever. You have to build economically viable technologies, and it doesn't matter. You don't have to have venture scale outcomes. You just have to have outcomes that can sustain your team and your product in the market. That's all we're trying to go for. And we've trained students to build out these technologies. In the last year, we've started an AI product development course. About 7 teams joined us, and 3 of those teams have gone from whiteboard to commercializing an AI product, with facing now serious midlife crisis in their early 20s, that like, oh shit, we built a startup by accident. So now they're very seriously considering, okay, what do we do? Do we just grow out clients and like pause the rest of the things we were going to do in our careers? And do we really need a master's to do this? And we're just undergrads, but we're building this out and people are liking it. So we've done that with a group of Indian undergrads, and now we're scaling up that program across different countries.
Oh, wow. Can I join? We'll retire early, but I wanted to summarize real quick. Everybody, you just found out how to make LinkedIn like interesting. So never complain again about your LinkedIn feed. Go in there. It sounds like really simple. You can watch the video, and we also get a lot of, while you're doing that, maybe you think about what you want to order on Uber Eats or your favorite platform, and consider backing out at the last minute and changing your mind. Make the algorithm work for you, folks. Swapneel, thank you so much. Any other last plugs, thoughts, insights, words of wisdom or warning?
I will just close out with free speech, not free reach.
I've come to talk with you again. Come and be inside my head. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. It's only a matter of time till we all win. Cancel doesn't stay. It's only a matter of time till we all win. Cancel doesn't stay. It's only a matter of time till we all win. Cancel doesn't stay. Cancel me. Cancel me. Cancel me. I got things to say. You can cancel me. Cancel me. Cancel me. I got things to say. You can cancel me. Cancel me. Cancel me. I got things to say. You can cancel me.